Welcome to our web exclusive. I'm Mike Montecalvo, along with Eyewitness News analyst Lieutenant General Reginald Centracchio. A terror threat once again in Europe, especially France. Don't ask, don't tell. But first, the General, we're going to start closer to home in the port of Providence. On Wednesday morning, they had a chemical drill in the port where they can actually detect now 22 different kind of chemical compounds that are going into the port. And it's not just for residents, it's for first responders too.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is probably state of the art. I'm sure other ports have it, but for Providence it's certainly state-of-the-art. It's a system where they have several sensors around the port itself, able to detect either individual compounds or certainly compositions of different chemicals. It being that some can be actually masked. If you use chlorine as an example, you can introduce sarin into that perhaps at the same time, and you need to ensure you can detect the sarin. So it has capability of looking at several compounds at the same time.
Well, they have 3 chemical detectors apparently, and they're going to have cameras set up in the Port of Providence for security. So how beneficial is this? Because I think people think about this and they think, okay, it's for a terror alert, but this is not just for a terror attack.
Absolutely not. You know, I think it's an all-hazard approach that they are taking, as is the case with most systems like this. Not only is it for terrorism, it's certainly for a spill. You know, an accident in the bay, perhaps somewhere along the port itself, as was the case with the drill. You could have an accident right at the perimeter of the port and still consider it a port accident. So I think what you're looking at here is the ability to be fine-tuned, or have a general application ranging from an all-hazard to a natural disaster, perhaps, or a terrorist attack. So this is an all-inclusive system, and I think it's extremely beneficial to the city of Providence as well as the state of Rhode Island.
What kind of fine-tuning do you think they might need to do here?
Well, I think what they're looking at is where does this information go to? Initially, it was looked at, it would go to first responders, perhaps, the civilian population around the area, and to other areas that would be certainly in the proximity of the accident or the terrorist act, if you will. So I think the fine-tuning has to be with the communications aspect of it, as well as to determine whether it is capable of detecting each of those compounds that it claims to have the capability to do.
Okay, we've been reading now and hearing now for probably about a month now about Europe under attack, so to speak, from Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda again this week issuing another warning to Europe, especially France, that they're going to attack at some time. Why are they singling out France?
Well, I think you need to look at perhaps the meaning behind the whole warning, if you will. You know, information comes to intelligence gathering agencies. They disseminate that information. I think you have a twofold purpose here. One is to first, in my opinion, test the system. Where does that information go? Who does it go to? Who disseminates it? And how much credibility can you apply to it? But as it relates to Europe being the target, and specifically France, I think this is another opportune time where you could, in fact, superimpose a terrorist act on top of an already unrest civilization and all the protests that are going on. If you introduce into that, in the midst of all that's happening, it would be extremely hard to detect. And keeping in mind that all the resources in the form of public safety are already out on the street, and they're focused in on the protests, not terrorism at this particular point.
Well, the protest that the General is talking about is raising the retirement age from 60 to 62 in France, but that's kind of a recent thing. They've been talking about France now from the Eiffel Tower. I think we talked about this about a month ago. Are they maybe targeting France because they might be weaker now than the United States, let's say?
No, I think I interpreted that to mean they were looking at particular points of interest for as far as tourism is concerned, because if you remember, England was also in that first shot across the bow as far as looking to protect, you know, Big Ben as an example, and other points of interest in England as well as all of Europe. But when you look at Paris and you look at the Eiffel Tower, I mean, that would send a tremendous message out, a psychological message, should that be compromised. So I think we're looking at several different things at the same time, and I think France is being looked at right now as a matter of being a real prime opportunity to introduce terrorism into an otherwise, you know, the population that's protesting because of the retirement age.
The United States stronger now than it was back in 9/11?
I think so too, and that has a lot to say about what they're looking to is the weaknesses in this system. This could be, in fact, nothing more than a propaganda piece of information that comes out. Al-Qaeda looks at where did the information go? Did it get disseminated to the people that they think it should have gone to? Will they take advantage of it? And is the United States being used as a a possible next target by identifying where that weak link is as far as dissemination of information based upon what we've seen over the last couple of days.
You know, General, if you go back into the 60s and 70s and all the protests took place in the United States, I'm guessing that Al-Qaeda wasn't as sophisticated back then to do some type of terror attack as opposed to what they are now.
I would even go so far to say as Al-Qaeda didn't exist back then. Al-Qaeda is relatively new insofar as its meaning. Al-Qaeda means the networking of terrorist organizations. You always had extremist groups out there, but Al-Qaeda was the one that came in and put it all together. So back in the 60s, although they were present, they weren't well organized, nowhere near having the technology they do today. I think we're looking at two different times, obviously, and fortunately for us, the United States, that is, during the 60s when we were going through street riots and burning of cities and so on and so forth, that would have been another prime opportunity, but they weren't sophisticated to that point at that time.
You know, when you see something like this, General, and you look at Iraq and Afghanistan and the pullout of troops, does it make or should it make the White House say, well, hey, look, maybe we need to rethink this?
You know, I think it's giving us an awful lot of areas to look at. You know, what are we going to do when you pull the troops out of there, if we do? What are you going to do for our own homeland security? What are you going to do for the borders? And all those things that will undoubtedly come into play as time goes on. I think, but all of this that's happening in the last several days will undoubtedly have us look into ourselves as to exactly what we have in place to protect the American people, our borders, our strategic capabilities, our information technology. How vulnerable are we? And I think, and we've said this so many times, I think our weakest link in this overall preparedness has to do very much with information technology, and are we capable of being able to push off such things as the virus that was introduced into the whole system a couple of weeks ago.
And that's not really what Europe is looking at. They're looking at specific targets being attacked.
They're looking at the physical terrorism, but in addition to that, there could be an awful lot going on that we're really not seeing. So having said that, the United States needs to pay better attention to the infrastructure as it relates to information technology, in addition to the hard targets for psychological reasons.
Well, one of the arguments for pulling the troops out, General, obviously, is Afghanistan having their own new form of government, so to speak. And they've had to throw like about a quarter of the ballots so far from their last election because they were tainted. You know, there's now talk about fraud with that election. What does that tell you?
Well, I'm hopeful that it tells us that they are sincere in coming up with a legitimate government that can, in fact, be trusted to themselves. And I think if it's interpreted that way, we also have to assume in Afghanistan that you have a subscription by the tribes in the area that they do want to have some kind of a central authority. To date, that has not been the case. So when you throw all these ballots out, you would only hope that they're participants in determining they don't want fraudulent elections in Afghanistan.
Iran is reporting some steady increase in the country's stockpile of enriched uranium. That's basically going against what the United Nations has been demanding now from them over the last 6 to 12 months. They want them to halt the program. Iran has said no again. It seems like it's a flip-flop every week on this issue. What is the next move now for the United Nations?
Last week, they announced that they wanted to get back into talks to talk about their nuclear program. I think some of the sanctions that we've seen the United Nations put in place are in fact starting to take some hold because it's impacting on the population itself. And once that happens, then there's going to be an awful lot of pressure by the population on the Iranian government. Keeping in mind, the Iranian government doesn't run Iran. It's the Khomeinis and the imams that do the actual determination as to where the country is going to go. If the people put pressure on the theological aspects of Iran in reference to who's running the country, you may see some of those sanctions work. You may see a whole new effort by Iran and specifically Ahmadinejad to want to come to the table to talk. But he's getting his direction from some guy higher than he is.
Okay, quickly, two more topics. Don't ask, don't tell. President Obama coming out on Wednesday claiming that the judge had no right to lift that.
Well, I'm not sure if he said it that way, he's wrong. The judge has every right to do that. Under the three parts of government, the judicial branch as well as the executive branch and the legislative branch have every right to do whatever they want, and it does impact upon the entire society. So what that judge did was right insofar as his authority. How he did it, is something that should not have been done. I think Obama now is looking at, I do know that they did put in an appeal. At the same time, however, the authority to go ahead and recruit gays openly has been put out to the recruiters with a little caveat, saying if it's reversed in the next several months, then you may have to come back out of the military.
Well, what kind of chaos would that cause?
It's caused a lot of chaos because you have uncertainty. So you have someone enlisting under good faith, puts his hand up, enlist, and 2 weeks later says, no, I can't do this now, I'm going to take it back.
What would that do for the recruiting portion right now? It would be great to get actually numbers in the next month or two just to see how many people.
Yeah, I think you'll see a little bit of an increase, but at the same time you'll see an equal amount of retention percentages going down too. You may see some enlistments coming up, but you'll see the extensions going down until it levels out somewhere, and that could be a few years down the road.
Okay, and finally going back in time, we're finding out that a Secret Service agent almost shot LBJ right after President Kennedy was assassinated.
Yeah,
it's going to be coming out in a book.
That would have been unprecedented. Apparently, LBJ was walking in the dark to his home, and this agent was startled by it, and he leveled his weapon at him and came close to discharging it. So that would have been certainly another sad chapter in American history.
Okay, and that book obviously hitting store shelves next week. General, thank you very much.
Good to be here.
Thanks for watching.